Hi, my name is CJ and this is my RC channel. In this video I am continuing the build of the 2-meter glider, the F3-RES, and it's time to start into the fuselage. Now there's a couple of options as you're deciding how to build this. You could be building this as a power glider, and you also have a choice of forward bulkheads if you're not using a motor, if you're just going straight up unpowered, and that is to use either of these two front bulkheads. There's actually three. The third one is set up for a motor, and it has pre-drilled holes. So the difference here is how many of these nose pieces you use. So with the narrower one you would use 2, and that would be your nose cone, and there's your forward area. And with 4, or all 3 pieces plus the 2 outers, this is what you basically get for inner space up there. Now the more weight you can put in the front of the glider, the less likely that you're gonna, okay, I'm saying that wrong. When you are balancing the CG, you want to add as little weight to the glider as you need to, and so the further forward the weight is, the more leverage it has over the front of the plane when you're trying to get balance. Okay, so an ounce here has a lot less effect on the center of gravity as an ounce, out here at the front. And let me just move the camera a little bit here. Okay, so you have the option to make this fuselage a little narrow, or pretty much just be a rectangular fuselage until you hit mid-wing, and then it tapers toward the rear a little bit. The advantage to doing that I see is that you have this open area here at the very nose that is, of course, wider than if you just did a single piece. Now, this is already has a long nose. If I throw a ruler on it, we're talking about 13 and 3/4 inches to the leading edge. And that's one of the reasons that I like this kit in particular. The last glider that I built in the 2-meter class, it was a RES glider. It didn't have a very long nose. It was shorter than this by about 4.5 inches, so it was only about 9 inches of nose, and I had to put a fairly significant amount of weight in the front to balance it out, and I didn't like that. One of the things that necessitated the higher weight is that I'm using lipos instead of a standard 4-cell receiver pack of NICADs that, this is a traditional battery pack, and it just wouldn't. First off, those traditional packs don't fit. You have to use a lipo in that particular glider, and it probably wouldn't fit in here either. Yeah, you'd never get one in between there. But in any event, because it was so short, I had to add a good bit more weight to balance it out. And I like the idea of having this large pocket, because that moves any weight that I might add, because I could pretty much fill this with like lead shot or lead blocks, and then fill it in with epoxy to keep the weights in place, and that would dramatically change how much weight overall that needed to be added. The further that weight is out, the more leverage it has over that balance point. So just by doing this wider fuselage, the standard lead bars or blocks that you have that have stick-ons, you can peel the stick-on stuff off of them to make space. Stack a couple of them here that probably get 25 ounces of lead up in the front if needed. So I think I'm going to go ahead and build it with the wider front end, because it's not going to be quite as pretty a nose when you shave this down, but you can get it pretty nice and round without sanding into this pocket. So I'm going to think about that a little bit, but that's probably what I'm going to do instead of tapering the nose. So right now, let me just move the camera again. I am going to do the fuselage doublers tonight. I've been cutting out all these pieces. I recommend numbering them. It just makes putting things together a little easier. I just write on the parts. All these parts are hidden, and I'm not using a clear covering anyway. I may be using transparent covering on the wings, but the fuselage is going to be is solid wood anyway, and it's going to be covered in a solid color. But it just helps you, organize. There's you'll see numbers here and here, R12, R13. There are no R12 and R13 parts. One of the sheets of parts, there's a couple pieces at one end, and then there's this whole open section of wood. And if you notice in the instructions, you'll see R12 and R13 on the parts section. I'll just go ahead and show you. Okay, so this piece here that has Z2 pieces, you can see R12, R13, and I'm sure it's just telling you in German that this is the piece of wood that's to be used for the fuselage. Usually when you're doing sheeting a fuselage, the bottom and top, you generally go with the grain the opposite perpendicular, instead of having the grain be lengthwise like this. That makes it less strong because it can squish. If you cut the pieces for sheeting with the grain going perpendicular to the line of the fuselage, you end up with a stronger fuselage. So, and then there's also another piece here that's a thinner balsa, which I've cut away and labeled this one as F27. That hasn't come up yet. It's probably part of the wing, because I've already built the tail, and now onto the fuselage, and the fuselage is all R pieces. So there's just to tell you, when you are looking for pieces that are shaped for the body, if you don't see them and you don't see an R12 and R13, don't panic. You just take this piece of wood and you cut pieces of it. Like I said, I would do it with a perpendicular grain. So you're just going to cut pieces this way and then sheet the fuselage top and bottom, and you're going to have to make a hatch. The hatch you'll probably go lengthwise and then put in a few braces. So in any event, I will cover all that as I go. I may just use a little bit of extra scrap balsa that I have if I need it, but I think this will be enough to cover up the fuselage and the parts in question. So on to the doublers. Remember, just anytime you're making a fuselage, make sure that you're making a left and a right. I highly recommend just laying them down so that they are next to each other. If you stick them together, make sure that you've got the obvious sections, and there you go. So all of these pieces need to be a mirror of each other. So if you're looking at yours and you've got it looking like this, you're doing it wrong. You don't want them to look alike. You want them to be a mirror of each other. So to do that, I'm getting ready to pack it in for the night. I've been cutting pieces and doing other stuff for the last couple of hours, and so I'm going to take the slower process and use the overnight glue. I could just take slow CA. I wouldn't use, if all you have is regular CA, like fast CA, I wouldn't try doing that. You could misalign the pieces and then you're stuck with an unusable, basically you're ruining your kit. And trying to get good coverage on all of this surface area with a fast drying CA is problematic. Even using slow dry, they're very large doublers. It's a lot of surface area, and you don't want missed areas. You want this to be as fully covered as possible, because that's where a lot of the strength for the fuselage is coming from, are these two plywood doublers. So I'm just going to take this wood glue, I'm going to pour some in a cup, and I'm going to use this Dubro epoxy brush. And the nice thing about using this glue for this particular part of the build is that I can wash this brush afterwards and use it again, because this is a water-soluble glue, at least until it's fully dried. So basically what I'll do is I'll face these two in like this. I'll brush on to the plywood surface. I'm going to fold them on top like that. And then once they're in place and lined, I'm going to take these two pieces of wood. I'm going to put them on top, and I'm going to put one of these heavy metal blocks on like that. And that should hold everything down. If I think it's not enough, I'll find some other weight to add, but you want to press these down, have them held down tight, and you want to leave them overnight to dry, at least 12 to 24 hours. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I may also go ahead and laminate these pieces as well while I'm using this glue and I'm not doing anything overnight. So I had to change plans a little bit. The wood glue that I was going to do these doublers with was rubbish. It had been sitting too long, I guess, and had broken apart into a small amount of thin liquid and a big blob of goo. And so I was not gonna even attempt to use that. So I used 30-minute epoxy and did everything else the same. Just brushed it on, put these together, weighted them down, and bingo. So now I'm going to start assembling this. And this does not need to be done over the plans like wings or tail section. So I'm just using a thin sheet of plastic here to keep glue from getting onto things. And I'm going to be doing things a little different from the plans. What plans there are, there's not much. And there's just some things I do like to do my own way. For example, doing the doublers first, the way the translated guidebook has you do it, and the way I've seen a couple of other people do it, is to do the doublers later, to start by taking the two plywood sides and the primary formers and box up the fuselage, and then put the doublers on down the road. I'm not a big fan of that. I like doing the doublers ahead of time. It's the way I've always done it on other kits, and I just decided to go this route. I also did these blind nuts that come with the kit. I epoxied these onto these two formers, And these are going to go on the fuselage like here and here, and I didn't want to try putting these things in place, the blind nuts in place after the fact. These little holes at the top of most of these pieces indicate a forward direction. So these pieces would go on like this and this. Now, one of the things I'm going to be doing is leaving the bottom unsheeted, at least in this section here, and I will not be I may be putting this in place in the early stages, but I may leave it off, and here's why. I always like to make sure that my fuselage and wing are properly perpendicular to each other. If you've watched some of my other videos, you've seen some of the ways that I measure from outer edges of the wings to the tail, and make sure that everything is square. And I'm going to be doing that before I drill the holes through the center of the wing for the wing bolts to pass through. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be basically taking a drill bit that will pass through this bolt, because as you can see, these are at an angle, and so the hole that is going to be in the wing to allow that pass through, that's going to be at a slight angle. It's going to be more or less perpendicular to the top surface of the wing, as you can see from the drawings here. But I don't want to drill that from above and try to guess. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait on the lower sheeting until the midsection of the wing is built. I'll line up the tail on the fuselage, and I will probably not be gluing the rudder in place or gluing this the boom in place, because I also want to make sure that the rudder is perpendicular to the line of the main section of the wing. That's also a very important measurement. So what I'm going to do is get things partially built, and as I said, when I have that center section done and can pull it off the board, I'm going to lay that upside down. I'm going to place the fuselage over the wing. It doesn't have like a forward piece of fuselage that comes over the leading edge of the wing. The wing just sits on the fuselage. So making sure that it's perpendicular is going to be very important and not altogether easy. So once the fuselage is on top, I can make all my measurements, and then I can use a hand drill and a drill bit that is going to be smaller than the one ultimately needed, but I can drill an initial hole, a guide hole. So I'll choose a bit that is going to fit through the blind nut as snugly as possible. And the blind nut is fairly tall, so once that bolt is in place, it's not going to have a lot of play because of the length of the barrel. So then I will, at the very least, mark the holes, but I'll probably just hand drill the holes with the small bit from below through the top of the wing, and then I'll use a larger bit to slightly enlarge that hole to have the bolt pass through. But I want that to be as snug as possible, because I want that interface not to have any play if possible, because I want to make sure that the wing is perpendicular and stays perpendicular. So I hope that made some sense. If it doesn't, just keep watching and everything will make sense, because you'll see it all come together. And then once I've got that measurement done and the wing in place, then I can flip the assembly over with the fuselage and the wing on top, bolt the wing in place snugly, and then the boom will be in place and it'll fit nice and snug, but it'll have the ability to rotate because I won't have glued it yet. And at that time, I will set up the rudder to be perpendicular to the wing. And then I can glue that in place, and then I can move on to putting the stabilizer block in place. So the stabilizer block will be the last thing that I do. And like I said, this deviates slightly from the instructions, but this is what I believe is going to get me the most accurate final assembly of all the pieces in relationship to each other. And I did decide to go with the wider nose block. That way I'll have as much room as far forward as possible for weight, so I can put as little weight as possible. I used Slow Zap for that. I glued a couple of these together, and then I thought about it and realized that the easiest way to do that is to basically just slide these in place, and don't glue them in, all of them in it initially, because what I'll do is once the fuselage is mocked up partially, and I'm ready to do the drilling, I'll slide all of the pieces onto here, and then push the boom into the fuselage, because it's going to pass through number 3 and 4, and that's going to provide the main stability. And then I can slide all those blocks up against the end of the fuselage, glue them together and to the boom all at one time, and that will be done when I'm got the rudder true. So again, all of this will come together a bit at a time, and it'll make sense in the end as the final assembly comes together. So what to do now? Since I'm going with R1, the large R1, and not tapering the front of the fuselage from 1 to 2 is basically square, and the pieces that are more or less lengthwise, like let's see here, that would be R6. Both of the two R6s, those hold the blind nuts, and R14, this piece, which goes in here, and I really don't know what that's for. It doesn't make much sense. It's just in the middle of the fuselage. It's got this cutaway in it. Oh, it's ballast plate, so that you can bolt some ballast onto here. So that's more or less the center of gravity there. So what you would probably do is take some type of weight with a hole in the middle and a pass-through bolt, or a plate that slides underneath, and so you basically would slide that bolt with the weight onto this and tighten it down. I may mock something up for you guys later, but I will go ahead and put that in place. So let's see, I'll be doing that. Let's see, R4 goes back here. 3 I'm not going to do just yet. So that's so I did, I marked this as 6H for Hinton, and 6Y, I thought that was a Y on another document. Anyway, so I know which of those is which. And so since these are all going in that same direction, and these two are not in a section that is tapering, I can basically just use a right angle to mount these up, and I'll glue one side of these together, and then I'll put the other side of the fuse on those. So basically, let me just move the camera here. Okay, so I am going to be putting in these two bulkheads here, R1 and R2, and as you can see, there's no taper. This is basically to here is everything's at 90 degree to the fuselage, so I can put this in, this in, this in, and because these are more or less horizontal, I can do these at 90s as well. Not worry about tapering. That'll all come together when the fuselage is pulled together. and I can just glue these singly. The remaining ones, when the two sides are together, like this, then I can pull the tail section in like that and glue those last couple of bulkheads here and here. I'm just going to glue the ones that are in the forward section, and then I'll put it together. And again, you'll see it as it goes, so I don't want to be overly repetitious here. So I'm going to go ahead. This is all going to be done with 5-minute epoxy. I could use CA on this, but this is the main structure for the fuselage. I want it to be solid, you know, especially for, you know, things like the R6s, because the two R6s hold the wing to the fuselage. So I want to make sure everything stays in place. So I kind of changed things up again. As I was assembling, I was using 15-minute epoxy and realized I had time to go ahead and get both sides, everything lined up, and got everything nose to tail, weighted it down a bit to keep things square, and clamped the entire fuse. So all the pieces are in, at least all the bulkheads and all the main brackets and braces. So once this dries for, you know, even with 15-minute epoxy, it's good to let it go a little longer. And so I'm going to give it at least 30-40 minutes before I unclamp stuff, and then I can start moving forward. The next step is going to be to take some of this, I think this is 4mm by 4mm square stock, and the way the instructions have you do this, you don't do this ahead of time. The cutouts are already made in the bulkheads for this stock, so you basically run it down the edges, glue it in place. This can just be done with CA. Probably a good way to clamp it in place is just to use stuff like this, laundry pins or some other small light clamp that you can get a bunch of, and then just clamp them along. Now there's something in the directions here which it's hard to show you, but let me see if I can get in on this. Okay, there's a piece of stock here that goes along this top edge, and then there's another piece of stock that comes from the tail, and one is above the other. So what you're going to want to do is cut a piece to about here for the forward section, glue it in place, and then once it's in place, shave it down to fit the side of the fuselage, and that will glue this one to the top one to the bottom one. That'll give a little extra strength in that forward section, which is a critical area. These get put in later. I'm going to go ahead and laminate these together with epoxy to make sure that those are nice and sound. So that's the main assembly of the fuselage. It's good to get sets of clamps like these. I got most of these off of Amazon in batches, and these were nice as well. It's Irwin quick grips. They're limited as to how big an item they can clamp, but they are really handy and give a solid grip if you're doing something that is in the right size range. These bar clamps are fantastic. One of them was bad. Just came with some of the mechanism just wasn't working right. But by and large, as you can see, some are red, some are orange. So I've bought several sets of these, and I'm probably going to pick up a few more down the road because they are just so useful. And for being something so small, they can clamp fairly large items. So and they're very light. So if you do left right like I have with these, it's not tipping over on you. Yeah, a good tool to have. So the fuselage is coming along nicely. These pieces are really easy to put in. The kit is cut very nicely. They just basically slide right into place. They're nice and snug, so minimum clamping is needed. The only place I really needed clamps was to hold the curve mainly on the top side. On the bottom side, it was even easier because the curve's a little more gentle. So now I'm going to go ahead and sheet the bottom to about here. That way I'll have access to these two holes, and I'll leave the remainder open so I can drill those holes. I could sheet a little bit in this direction, but then I'll have to, make it match in between, so it'll just be easier just to sheet the rest all at one time. And strength isn't an issue at this point for what I'm going to be doing. So sheeting up to here, that way again access there. I'll go ahead and sheet the nose and get going on the hatch, because I'm going to want this area cleaned up and done for wing placement. And I'll go ahead and drill this out a bit, so that when the nose is in place, I'll have access to this cavity to add weight. So I'll basically go on about like that, but I need the sheeting on first before I can attach this. So everything is going together very quickly, very easily. I really like this kit. I thought from the plans that I had seen that this was going to be a nice, easy build, and I was definitely correct. It's quite a snap to put together. So now that the strips are in here, take a sanding block or two. I'm using a couple of different ones with different grits. Both of them have like a rubber base, so there's some flexibility, but it's a hard rubber, so it's quite flat. And what I've done is level out these surfaces so that when I do sheeting, everything's going to mate up nice, and the wing has a nice smooth, even surface to line up with. So I highly recommend doing that. It just takes a few extra seconds, and you're going to get a better bond when you glue the sheeting on, because you don't want to have like a raised edge or something that's going to prevent that sheeting from making a full contact from the balsa outer to the plywood inner and then to the balsa stringer here. So having that leveled out and smooth is going to make for a better, stronger overall result for your fuselage. So now I'm going to start sheeting and working the hatch. Now the way the hatch is done, give me just a moment to find the piece. Okay, how the hatch works. It's a very simple and very functional solution. So we have R21, which is right here, and R20, and then we have this little piece of carbon fiber strap. So how this works, we're going to have a piece of sheeting. It goes from here to here, and that stays in place. That's glued down. And we have a piece of sheeting from here to here, and that is also glued down. And R21 is going to go underneath that piece of sheeting in between the stringers on the fuselage. Just put this in view. So R21 will be glued underneath the sheet, okay, and that provides a strong point for basically it's a spring, this strap, okay. Then we're going to cut a couple of pieces of decking from that sheet, same place we're getting the other pieces from. That's this sheet here. It's like a 2.5 mil, and we're gonna make the upper part of the hatch. Now, as you can see, the R20 piece extends past the hatch underneath right here, like a little tab, okay, and that holds down the front of the hatch. And then this, imagine that this is the hatch right here, okay. We're gonna have a piece of this sticking forward of it like that, so that will tuck underneath this sheeting here, okay. On the back side, this is gonna end at the end here, so as you can see, we need to cut a little extra piece of this to make that hatch the right size. And then this is going to be glued down here. Now it's not going to be glued its entire surface. You only want to glue maybe 1 inch of it, okay? And that's going to make this a spring. So that will tuck underneath here. So when you're putting the hatch on, you're basically going to start at the rear of the hatch, getting this tongue underneath R21, and then it will slide under like that, and that will allow the front of the hatch to be laid flat, and the tongue, the end of this, to go underneath the sheeting, and then this will return to this position here. So the spring will keep the hatch closed at the rear, and the tab keeps it closed at the front. And to open the hatch, you grab the rear of the hatch from either side, lift it up, extending this spring, and then sliding the hatch backwards until the tab in front is clear of the sheeting and can be lifted up. So very simple, elegant solution, very light, and it should work great. The only thing I don't like about it, and this is not a thing really, it's an issue of aesthetics. Normally when I like design my own kits and I'm building fuselages, I like to use large triangular stock, and I make my doublers shorter because you can't sand plywood very well, especially when it's mixed with balsa wood. It tends to you end up sanding away balsa wood and leaving the plywood behind. It doesn't shape well, is what I'm trying to say. So usually I'll make a setup where there's, I'm like giving you a corner here where there's wood, there's a doubler, and then there's triangle stock, okay, and then there's sheeting on, let's say up top here. That allows me to shape this area, to remove all of this and have a more rounded shape. So it doesn't make a cylinder out of the fuselage, but it does give you a more rounded, less boxy appearance, and it's more aesthetically pleasing. But the name of the game here isn't looks. The name of the game here is weight and function. So, you know, the fact that this is going to be a very boxy fuselage, no big deal. I'm fine with that. You know, it's got a nice lean aerodynamic look. It's got a nice long nose. It's going to be a very good looking aircraft, and at any distance at all, you can't really tell that this isn't a more rounded shape versus a more squared off shape. That's the only thing. Like I said, it's not a complaint that there's anything wrong. It's just, you know, I'll sacrifice a bit of strength and or material size interior space. You know, there's a lot of trade-offs there when you do this, but it does give you a, you know, a more rounded look to your fuselage, which is just something I try to go for. But this, if you know, this is a competition glider. It is in that class of high-end rudder, elevator, spoiler gliders to compete in that class of thermal duration. And so getting it as light as possible, you know, sub 450 grams is the goal. And that was what they were designing for. They weren't designing for looks. They were designing for function. And I think they've done a phenomenal job in that vein. So, so as I said, I'm going to go ahead and start cutting the pieces I'm going to need and start sheeting this up, and I will show you things as this progresses. Whenever I can, I try to show you tools that I use and how I use them. This is an excellent opportunity to do that. I'm cutting out pieces of sheeting, and an excellent way to do that instead of just eyeballing things is get, you know, one measurement and cut multiples up front. This is a little something I picked up today. I was at the hobby store. I needed some more 15-minute epoxy and a few other little knickknacks, some X-Acto blades, and I saw this, and it was $5.99, and it is a Midwest Products hobby and craft square, 4-inch square, and US and metric measurements, and some neat things. It's got various dowel measurements, so you can stick a dowel in and confirm the size. It's got these little suckers. It says strip identification gauge. Not 100% sure what that's about, but anyway, it's there. But there's a more useful reason for those. Ruler and basically a protractor, 45-degree edge with built-in protractor in 5-degree increments. So you have the various degrees here of a swing from this point. Now, what I'm using it for right at the moment, I just got it and it's already coming in handy, is to since the fuselage is mainly square, I need pieces that are the same width. So I need perpendicular cuts, and I'm making it a little larger than necessary. The excess I'll just sand away. So these little strip gauges or whatever they are, number one, they make it easy to stand this up or to you know, keep it fairly close to being stable. What's really nice is that it's like a T-square. So I can take one piece of wood and line up my ruler with it, and the ruler is going to be perpendicular to this surface here. So that makes it very easy to get a cut and have a uniform line. So just little things like that. You know, having the right tools, having a variety of different tools, you know, they come in handy at all different times for different things. So just wanted to show that to you. Okay, this is still drying. It's probably dry. I'm just making sure because I don't want this this spring to glue down. Now, as you can see, there's this piece of plastic here that I have trimmed off and slid underneath the spring here, and that keeps it from being glued down, even if some of the CA wicks up into it, into the carbon fiber, which it can and probably did a little bit, but it's nice and stiff. You know, it's got a lot of spring to it. I started by putting in some zap gap, basically from about here forward, and then placed the carbon strap in place with this piece of plastic, you know, here forward or here rearward, and then once that was somewhat dry, I took thin CA and a small piece of fiberglass cloth, just a little rectangle here, you should be able to see that. And just one layer and thin CA. I took another piece of plastic, laid it over top and pressed down so that I wasn't gluing myself to the laminate here. And then used a one of these stirrers to hold the, down into that groove there, and while it was setting up, again with that piece of clear plastic protecting the other items from getting glued together, and that way, as you can see, there's the fiberglass cloth is nicely, it's depressed into here. It's solidly touching all surfaces, and it's not going to go anywhere. So when this is, when I'm sure it's fully dry and nothing is going to wick forward, I'll pull this out, and then I can use it. Now I've already test fitted everything and sanded the surfaces. As you can see, this edge has already been sanded here, the edges here, so this drops right in. So the way this is going to go, again, like I explained earlier, you have to lift the spring, slide the hatch rearward until the tab can go in, and then the spring will hold this down, once the plastic is out of the way. I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes for you. So anyway, the hatch is done. Now I need to start sheeting the underside. And the only thing I'm not sure about is how to open the hatch. And what I may do is either make a few little indents in the wood here to be able to catch the edge of the hatch to lift it, or maybe put a small, like a little screw that you can grab and lift with the something. Let's see. Okay, just for demonstration's sake, this would be considerably smaller, but let's say I put a little screw through where the wood is, and just left a little bit of it protruding like that, so it was like a little knob or pull handle. That might work also. So I'm gonna take a look and see how other people have done it, and decide how I'm going to do it. This is the last segment in this video. I'll be continuing the build of the fuselage in another video. As you can see, I've done a lot of shaping. The hatch is done. Been sheeting the bottom and sanding away. That's as far as I'm going to sheet for now, until I actually am doing the boom. I just stuck these sticks through here just to kind of show you the angles on these, and why I am not installing this until after I've done the drilling of the wing. If this were in place, as you can see, this should be touching this bulkhead here. If it were, I would not be able to get a drill bit to go down through the blind nut and through the wing, and thus I wouldn't be able to get an accurate hole. I'd have to try to angle something in, and it wouldn't be right. So that's why I've left this off for the time being, and I am not sheeting the rest of the bottom. Okay, just, again, everything is coming together very easily, very quickly. It's a great kit. I'm really just surprised at how fast this goes together. And if you've got the right glues and the right tools, it just goes together really quick. Make sure you've got a variety of sandpaper. As you can see, I've taken a lot of material off of this block. It used to be this wide, and it only took a few minutes with some combination of 100 grit and then 180 grit and then some 250 grit and I think 300 to kind of just smooth things up. I'll probably do some 600 on it at the tail end of things, just to, you know, cover everything and get it ready for covering. I'm not painting, so it doesn't have to be, you know, polished smooth or anything like that. I'm not going to do any priming. I left this on here just to show you, you know, it's okay to have a little bit of overhang. It's better to cut your pieces a little bit wide. There's lots of material. These 3 pieces here will cover the remainder and leave, you know, some of it will be left over. And I've still got this much of the original sheet left. So there's more than enough wood. So don't skimp, you know, go ahead, make it a little wider, and then you just sand this off. You know, it goes away real easy with 100 grit sandpaper. And once you've worked it down rough and gotten a bit of a curve going, you can, you know, continue the sanding process. I've got everything just lightly rounded and, you know, just trying to make it look nice, not losing any strength there. So I'm glad I did the extra large, the third piece here in the middle to make that cavity extra large. You know, even with all the material I've sanded away, I haven't come into that cavity. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you're enjoying the series. Please click like, please subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.